Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first stop in my end of the world global tour. Um, so first of all, I would like to thank Ali and his team for organizing this event. As you can see, it is an amazing space. I would also like to thank you guys for being paid subscribers. As you know, for the past 2 years, I've worked as a high school teacher in Beijing. And now that you're supporting my work, I'm now able to travel more around the world and see for myself what's going on in this world so I can do better geopolitical analysis. So what I want to do today is basically provide a framework for understanding how we got to this point and where we're going. So to start, I want to tell you my first impressions of Los Angeles. It's my first time here, and Theo Vaughn invited me to be on his podcast. So I want to thank Theo Vaughn and his team for being such gracious hosts. I came in Wednesday, and they put me in West Hollywood, a very nice place, beautiful, a really beautiful hotel, and I enjoy walking around the city in order to get a sense of the culture. And I was walking around the Sunset Boulevard area, and the residential area is just beautiful. And I'm just admiring the houses, the sunlight, the beauty of it all. And then I see right in the middle of the pavement is a pile of dog shit. I obviously walk around it. It takes me a couple minutes before I realize it probably didn't come from a dog. So that's my first impression of LA, unfortunately. And then my next impression of LA is I went to breakfast and I went to the cheapest place I could find. I paid $17 for avocado on toast. $17 on avocado on toast. And I was like, there better be cocaine in this thing, okay? And unfortunately there wasn't. So I've been walking around the city. There's really a lot of homeless people. There's a lot of drug addicts. And the impression that I've developed these past 3 days is America is suffering from imperial exhaustion. It's an empire really in decline. It's exhausted. And, when I was in China, um, I would just hear Americans talk great things about China. And I live in China and I see all the problems. And I really didn't understand why Americans thought China was great until I came here and see the world from your perspective. And honestly, from your perspective, everything is great. So let me give some historical background as to how we got to this point. So the year is 1944, and America is about to win this war against Japan and Germany. They organized the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire, and the idea is to establish the US dollar as a world reserve currency. The logic of this is very simple. World War II, America had to build a lot of factories to supply armaments for its war machine. Now that the war is coming to an end, what do you do with these factories? And the answer is you turn these factories from manufacturing munitions and weapons to manufacturing TVs, cars for the global market. Problem is, the entire world is destroyed because of World War II. So what America did was lend the world the money in order to buy cars and washing machines and television sets. And this became the basis for Pax Americana, as well as the US dollar system. Now, because America was lending so much money to Europe and to Japan, it needed collateral for this financing. And this collateral, of course, was gold. So the agreement was that US dollars would always be pegged to gold. We call this a gold standard. And it worked great for the first 10 years, first 10, 20 years, because it allowed the average American middle class person to live like a Roman emperor. If you were a white male in 1950s, you were in paradise. You had maybe a factory job, but for that factory job, you could have your wife work at home. You could raise 3 kids and have them all go to college. You could go on vacation twice a year. You had 2 cars. It really was the best life. But unfortunately, America started to waste a lot of this, what we call exorbitant privilege, the right to print US dollars. And so America started to do stupid things, like, for example, the war in Vietnam, the space race, the Great Society. And at this point, the world recognized that maybe America is spending too much money. At the same time, the rest of the world is catching up to America industrially. So Germany and Japan, they were deficit in the war, but they're working really hard. And now their industrial capacity is surpassing that of the United States. So that what's happened is America went from a creditor nation to a debtor nation. And that's bad because you owe everyone gold. And there's none of gold in the world to pay off the debt. So what happens is in 1971, Richard Nixon declares, oh, remember how in 1944 we agreed that US dollars will be pegged to gold, the gold standard? Well, forget about it, okay? From now on, the US dollar, it's all free floating. It's just fiat currency. We will not give you gold for US dollars. So now this creates a crisis of confidence. And to resolve this crisis of confidence, Nixon does 2 things. He visits Saudi Arabia and agrees to get them to sell oil only in US dollars. We call this the petrodollar. And the other thing that he does is he goes to China and gets China to start to liberalize its economy, to start working in the United States. And basically what China does is use its cheap labor in order to manufacture goods for the global economy and sell its cheap labor in US dollars, okay? And these 2 things, what happened in the Middle East and what happened in East Asia, now becomes the new framework for the global economy. And the idea is that the Middle East will sell its oil to East Asia so that Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China could then manufacture goods to sell the world. And all this is being facilitated in US dollars. And all this money, because it's being facilitated in US dollars, goes back to America. But because of this global system, America now has to shift from a manufacturing power to a financial power in order to process all this trade. Okay, and this has led to the financialization, the hollowing out of the American manufacturing sector. And this has led to tremendous problems in American society. For one thing, it's led to tremendous inequality. Another thing is that America now is forced to provide security guarantees for the entire world. So its military is overextended. This is what is called imperial overstretch. Another thing that happens is there's so much power in the financial sector, and that leads to corruption. And this is what obviously led to the 2008 subprime crisis, because you have these Wall Street banks out of control, and they were all engaged in speculation, and they didn't really care because they knew that no matter what happened, the government would pick up the tab at the end of the day. So they engage in all this reckless behavior. And this has led to the world that we live in today. Obama was elected in 2008 to fix these issues, right? To represent the working class, but he didn't do that. That's why in 2016 we got Donald Trump, who promised to build a wall to stop illegal immigration. He also promised to basically prevent the world from taking advantage of America. And this has led to the Trump years. And this system was fundamentally unstable, but at the same time, there was no alternative. And so this system kept on going, but there were all these signs that the system would eventually break down. And one of the first major signs was Brexit. Another major sign was the election of Donald Trump in 2016. But the major sign that the system basically is now in its twilight or is about to collapse is the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this was beyond the imagination of many American leaders, because they grew up in a time when American power was ascendant. And the idea that Russia, which is a gas station of nukes, is able to defy the American order, that set shockwaves around Europe and the United States. What's even worse is that the sanctions that America imposed on Russia backfired. So as you remember, the Americans and Europeans froze about $300 billion in Russian assets around the world. They also kicked Russia off the SWIFT system, and they imposed all these sanctions on Russia. But rather than hurt the Russian economy, what it did was destroy the credibility of the Western financial system. And now countries like China are like, wait a minute here. If the United States can just freeze our assets for no reason, then we should not buy that many US assets. So now you see this massive shift from buying US treasuries, which was previously considered the best investment, to now buying gold. And this puts additional pressure on the US financial system. And this war in Ukraine, it's a test of the credibility of Pax Americana. But because Russia is a nuclear power, there's really not much you can do about Russia. You can support Ukraine all you want, but eventually Ukraine's going to get exhausted. So you can make the argument that Trump started this war in Iran in order to establish the credibility, reestablish the credibility of Pax Americana. That ultimately, at the end of the day, the U.S. military is the greatest military in the world, invincible, and obviously we know what happened. This is not true. The U.S. military, it's very corrupt, it's overextended, it's not very strategic, it's very bureaucratic. And now basically the United States is losing this war in Iran, which is causing even more strain on the American political system. But what's happening, and this is the most important thing, is a domino effect is being created where this global economic system created by the Americans, it's now under strain on multiple on nodes. Okay, so the big thing to watch now is Japan, because as you know from the news, the Japanese currency, the yen, it is collapsing against the U.S. dollar. This is a really bad sign. Why? Because Japan and the Middle East provide a lot of liquidity for the global economy, which basically means that this liquidity buys up U.S. treasuries, which allows the U.S. economy to continue to be a Ponzi scheme. Once the Middle East and Japan are no longer able to buy U.S. treasuries, if they're not able to invest in the U.S. economy, then the AI bubble collapses, the private credit bubble collapses, and we don't know what will happen, okay? Because this is a systems collapse. So what's happening in Japan is crucial, and that's why, for the first time in a few decades, the United States has intervened to save a foreign currency. It's not a lot of intervention to save the US dollar, but this is the first time in like 30 years the United States has intervened on behalf of a foreign economy. Some of you may remember a few days ago, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, he had a picture. He was running on a notebook, Japanese yen, $5 to $10 billion. And people understood this as propaganda, where Scott Bessent is trying to reassure investors that the U.S. Treasury will come in and save the Japanese yen. But it's also a sign of desperation, meaning there's really that many toolkits, there are that many tools that the U.S. Treasury has to stop the global economy from collapsing. So it's engaging in optics. It's trying to engage in propaganda. It's trying to use these tricks to trick you to think everything is fine, when really we're only a few months away from total system collapse. Okay? And this total system collapse, what does it look like? Well, it looks like stock market collapse, financial collapse in the United States, right? AI bubble, stock market private credit bubble, it's all being propped up by liquidity from around the world. As liquidity dries up, the U.S. economy collapses. Okay? It also means famine in Africa and other places. And it means ultimately the merging of the war in Ukraine and Iran, which will lead ultimately to World War III. I already think we are in World War III, but you can make the argument that we're still in a regional conflict. And so we've reached a point of imperial exhaustion, meaning that the system the United States created in 1944, it's reached its last legs. Okay, and right now the people in charge, these imperial bureaucrats, they themselves are exhausted. They have no ideas. They have no imagination. They're just trying to use as many tricks as possible to maintain this very unstable system. And the more desperate they get, the more anxious they get, the more unstable the system becomes. And so that is my introduction to today. And I hope this history gives us a framework to have a very vibrant discussion. Okay, so thank you very much. Okay.